Continuing with the World Bible, edited by Robert O Ballou. The Hindu, the Worshipers of Brahma, herdsmen, shepherds, tillers of the soil, warriors and wanderers, a race of white men, dwelt once upon the plains of Central Asia. Light skin is more of a appropriate thing, but whence they came and when, and how long they lived there, what the details of their daily lives were, when and why they separated to wander far from their ancient home, and in different directions from it no one knows, for they left behind them no record. At least none which has yet been plainly read. Bits of correlated evidence indicate that they were both agricultural and nomadic, making long stops to raise crops for their herds and flocks, then pushing on to new locations. At some time, or times, in their migrations, some went far to the west, some to the east. They were apparently a people of astounding vigor and ingenuity, these Indo-Europeans who called themselves Aryavatra, a people was the land, I think. A people who conquered the inhabitants of whatever country they entered, forcing upon them their forms of religion and government and their customs. One of the western offshoots founded the Persian kingdom. Another established Athens and Lacedaemon, beginnings of the Greek nation. A third went inland on a long peninsula shaped like a boat, where on 7 hills they built the city which became Rome. Another group went to the land which is now Spain, and still another crossed the sea to what is Cornwall, England. Now, 40,000 years ago, what can be said to be anatomically modern human, or some people look at the period of time from 110,000 years ago, a common ancestor. But humans started around Afghanistan, humans started speaking over 200 sounds instead of 40, like Neanderthal did. And this made its way all over the world, really. I forgot that was going to happen and got startled, but anyways, I apologize for that. Over the passes of the Hindu Kush Mountains went one of the most powerful of the wandering groups, down into the valley of the Indus and settled there, where the earth was watered by the melting of the everlasting snows on the heights above. And, 4 tribes became the Hindus, and the Persians were the other tribe. But both groups, in their legends, speak of the 5 tribes. They brought with them the elements of an as-yet unrecorded religion. Little is known about it, but its vestiges may be found in the faiths later developed among their descendants. They worshipped a sky father, and who in the language of those who went into India was the Yaush Pitar, which became Zeus Pater in Greek. The Yes Pitar are Eulpater in Latin, and in conception, if not etymologically, Ahura Mazda in Zoroastrianism, our Heavenly Father in later Judaism and in Christianity. They paid homage also to his daughter Ushas, the dawn, who became Eos. See also Easter as the start of spring. Archeos in Greek. Aurora in Latin. To his consort, Mother Earth. Priviti, Greek Gaiameter, and the sun god, Surya, Greek Helios. Namasurius, or sun solutions. So they're worshiping the sun. Look at what they say. Some people are going to claim that, oh, we're not worshiping the sun. Yeah, dude, you are. Yama became, with Yami, the Adam and Eve of Hinduism. More like the Noah, but... And later, the ruler of the regions of the dead. Yima, the Good Shepherd, became the first man of the Persian religion. In their religious rites, these people who went into India drank the fermented juice of the mountain plant Soma, and worshipped Soma as a god. The Persians sanctified the same plant, calling it Hyoma, and developed a tradition that Zarathustra talked with an angel of that name. Now, you can have these drug-like experiences. If you've heard my Soma poem, that's really how I felt. You can be like you're smoking marijuana and using heroin and meth all at once without, poisoning yourself and all that. What happens within you. But Soma, typically they even replaced the Soma because it was hard to get marijuana and opium and ephedra and mix them all together. But the Hyoma blend was 37 other plants. Some of them enhanced it, some of them were just for health reasons, and then, it's an enhancement to the ritual. It wasn't like they used large amounts and they just got completely stoned with no effort or context of their own. Well, that happened too, but, not to that extent. But anyways. In India, this race of white men became joined with Aboriginal tribes already there, eliminating those among them who were troublesome. They began to establish and record a religion that has fathered more conceptions and gone through more mutations than any other under the sun. So that, if one asks concerning an inhabitant of India, what religion had he? It is necessary before answering to ask in return, in what part of India did he live, and when and under the influence of what leader or leaders? So even more than Egypt, which actually comes a lot closer than people realize. L.D. Barnett says, Hinduism is not one homogeneous growth of religious thought. It is, on the contrary, an aggregation of minor growths, some of cognate origin, some of foreign province, all grouped under the shadow of one mighty tree. Its churches, as well as the stately cathedral where scholars and princes worship, as the humblest shrine where villagers offer flowers to some god born of their own hearts, are the wayside spot haunted by some godling which may have dwelt there long before the Hindus came into India, or may have arrived there last week. And there's psychological reasons why people worship such entities, but anyways. Within this mighty force of varied expression that sways the religious impulses of nearly 250 million human souls, there is, well, it's over 1 billion now, isn't it? And there has been of old room for the widest range of theological variants, from the most complicated worship of a multiplicity of gods to the most exalted recognition of and homage to the one God, the mighty unexplained force which created and rules the universe, as opposed to the demiurges, or things that are treated as demiurges. These conceptions have changed from time to time, from scripture to scripture, from group to group, and from individual to individual within a group. as the almost unbelievably large volume of Indian sacred literature has grown, and the followers of Indian religious concepts have split into innumerable sects, it has become impossible to state succinctly and comprehensively the details of Hinduist theology. Hindutva is a phrase coined nowadays. Yet there are central threads which run through all phases of it. Relics of the early unrecorded Indo-European religion, and other concepts which have grown out of later conditions of life, and changing threads of thought. In the valley of the Indus, the newcomers composed, and at some later date recorded, the most ancient of all the world's scriptures, the Vedas, of which the Rig Veda is the oldest. No one knows when it was written. Estimates date it as far back as 4000 BCE, but conservative scholarship says merely that the 10,000 stanzas which compose it, more than the bulk of the Iliad and the Odyssey together, were written earlier than 1000 BCE. The title of the work means stanzas of praise, though some of the later hymns are blessings and curses, and they have proven that some of the information, and even some of the language maybe even, comes from a period closer to 40,000 years ago. And some of it, even before Homo sapien, 10 times as old as Homo sapien. Homo habilis, Homo erectus was around during the time where some of the information was passed on with a degree of accuracy that either indicates advanced science or indicates that extinct races and subspecies of humans passed on information. The Yajurveda repeats many of the hymns of the Rig Veda with additional stanzas and contains short prayers and long, solemn litanies. The Samaveda, devoted chiefly to the worship of Indra, is the Veda of music and also contains a number of verses borrowed from the Rig. The Atharva Veda contains 730 hymns, a number of which are charms of witchcraft, blessings, and curses. Its chief value lies in its revelations of popular practices, superstitions, and folklore. By far the most important and interesting of these four ancient books is the Rig Veda, with its questioning and its wonder, and its frequent deep humility. Now, it can be very beautiful in parts, but beauty's not it. Some of the stuff it teaches is kind of against science. Some of it is, its morality or theology is seriously questionable, but the beauty of it is something to be respected. Many of the hymns, written before the frequent repetition of theological concepts by priests, had bred authoritarian certainty, are filled with an odd, wondering search for answers that might have come from a child. What covered in, and where, and what gave shelter? Was water there, asks the singer of the creation hymn? And what was above it then, and what below it? Who verily knows whence it was born, and whence comes this creation? He, the first origin, he verily knows it, or perhaps he knows not. Even God, the almighty creator, perhaps even his knowledge was not absolute. Yeah, I would never make such a claim. But realize, to reach you with what you do not know, you must often be reached with what you do know. In the earliest of all Hindu religious books, there is only one brief mention of caste, which later became so important a part of all Hindu religious belief the society of earliest Vedic times was of simple organization, patriarchal, with rajas ruling as chieftains, and often by hereditary succession. The father ruled the household and offered the religious sacrifices. The wife was mistress of the house, assisted at the sacrifice, hence Yasodhara's complaint at Gautama's abandonment of her. See the introduction to the Buddhist scriptures. That will come later. And shared in the control of the children, of slaves, of the unmarried brothers and sisters of the husband. The Rig Veda says that there are 33 gods. Well, what's the word for God? Is it Devi? That's not a god. Though these do not include some of the minor deities, and even some of the 33 seem to have been of little importance. Several of these, notably Indra, the god who protected his people in battle. Understand something about this. That sometimes names or qualities of the divine have been personified and split. Agni, the god of fire. Mitra, the sun god, deity of the Mithraist, of which Christianity is a branch, and Varuna were brought with them from the earlier Asiatic home, along with Vyaushpitr, Ushas, and others mentioned earlier. Traces of all of these are found also in the Persia of Zarathustra's time, and remain to corrupt his message in transmission after him. The characteristics of Indra are of particular interest in thinking of the god concepts of the world religions. Most people have attributed to a god and a special interest in their welfare in battle. In the early days of Judaism, the God of Israel was not a peaceful deity, but a mighty man of war. It was Jehovah, Yahweh, who sent the plagues to torture the Egyptians. The source, Yah, the negative, positive divinity. The cyclical, linear deity. To torture the Egyptians in retaliation for their persecution of the Jews, who caused the waters of the Red Sea to part. Reed Sea. Let's not look at the Greek, look at the Hebrew, Yam Suf. To part, well, there wasn't Hebrew at the time. Yam Suf. Some words are different in the Middle Ages Hebrew, but the Aramaic. Who caused the waters of the Reed Sea to part, so that the children of Israel could cross over on dry land, and then could come together again to overwhelm the Egyptians, who had other linguistic sources of their Yahweh formula. It was Yahweh who brought calamities to the enemies of Israel, who had stolen the Ark of the Covenant. Jehovah, who'd always fought beside his people and made one of them equal to many from among those who followed other gods. Even Jesus, whose followers think of him as symbolizing the ideal peace on earth, goodwill towards men, is reported to have said, "I bring you not peace, but a sword." And later Christianity has really backed that "I bring you a sword" teaching up, hasn't it? There is a strange and persistent reminder of this ancient concept in modern times. Since the beginning of World War II, story after story of miraculous escapes from death have filtered into the news. Flyers forced down at sea, drifting for days on a raft, made shore or were rescued after daily prayers and the singing of hymns were begun. A boy in a submerged submarine, which could not surface because of its mechanism had jammed, prayed, then fainted, and in his fall jarred loose. The fouled mechanisms of the ship rose to the surface. Bullets were deflected from the vital parts of religious soldiers by sacred talismans they wore. the English Channel, during the 5 terrible days when the British Army was being evacuated from Dunkirk, was miraculously calm and answered the prayers of the British people. It is not to question the faith out of which these stories have come that there are mentioned here, but merely to point out that here again is the conception of a god of war protecting his people in battle, as did Jehovah in the early days of the Old Testament, as Indra did in the prehistoric days of the Indo-European migrations. So the people wanted to, slant the idea of God. So he's like our father, Apparently, the early inhabitants of India, whom the newcomers found there, believed that the powers of nature were manifestations of gods. Well, don't say there's natural law if there's not a natural lawgiver. Frequently, the same god had more than one name. Of these, several were added to the pantheon of the invaders, making a confusing catalogue of many names. Religion's as simple as or as complex as you want it to be. I'm fine with it being complex. But the deities thus designated had not all existed from the beginning of time, and they too were created, along with the sky, the earth, the creatures of the earth, and man. The gods are later than this world's production, says the Rig creation hymn. Well, the Devis, the shining ones, or, well, the Asuras, definitely. What other word can be mistaken as God to a Westerner? In the early hymns of the Rig, creation is believed to have taken place through some phenomenon of natural generations without any personal god acting in the process. In later hymns, there is introduced the idea of a personal creator. Prajapati, a physical being whose body was divided, his head becoming the sky, his feet the earth, his navel the air, his eye the sun, and his breath the wind. In the Rig Veda, the conception of life after death is vague. Yama is the ruler of the region to which persons go after death, whether they have led good or bad lives, but the character of that region or the manner of existence there seems clouded in mystery. The nearest approach to any idea of salvation consists in a state of happy and prosperous being on this earth before death. So Karl Marx says, already superseded by the ancient religions, right? In the later Atharva Veda, there is described a dark pit below the earth into which the evil are hurled after death, and there is a vague intimation that the good go to a happier place. It is only in the still later Upanishads and the Mahabharata that there emerges a clear belief in a hell for the wicked and a heaven for the righteous, inhabited during the intervals between rebirths. By the time of the Brahmanas, probably about 800 BCE and later, many of the peoples who had originally settled in the valley of the Indus had pushed on to the valley of the Ganges, where there was rain only at the time of the monsoons. And the monsoon season, like August, September, gave way to a lot of mythical stories about it. In addition to hardships imposed by frequent droughts, there was the depressing effect of a more difficult climate. The daily tasks necessary to maintain life became more onerous, and apparently the dark-skinned aborigines, set off from the white invaders by the sad ancient barrier of color, were compelled to perform many of these tasks under duress. The caste system had started sway before that. It is at this time that the system of castes, so integral a part of Orthodox Hindu religious belief, became important. Now, Indoctrinated? Yeah, that might have came later. The human race, the Brahmas say, was divided at the time of its creation into the Brahman, our priestly class, which now became the real rulers of the people. The Rajanya, our Kshatriya, the warriors, the political establishment. The Vaisya, composed of farmers, artisans, and tradesmen, and the Sudra, are serfs. For latter explanation of the castes by a Brahma, see the creation of the castes from the Markandeya Purana, number 76. Remember, some of the Puranas are actually of older origin than the Vedas. Actually, a lot of them are, and there's more than the official 16, by the way. I can only think of encountering quotes or parts of 20 of them, but I think there's more. There are some that reside in temples and stuff and haven't been published. Probably even more than the existing scriptures. Anyways, at the caste system emphasized in the Brahmanas grew in importance, the position of the lowest class was demeaned to the point where neither gods nor men would speak to the Sudra. As time added new complexities to Hinduism and its reflections in Hindu society, castes themselves were divided. Robert Hume, in The World's Living Religions, says that in modern times there are over 2,000 mutually exclusive subcastes in the Hindu system. In the Brahmanas, there was developed the creation story of the golden egg, which floated for about a year in a universe which was entirely water, even as the first chapter in Genesis, which, came later, right? Then, the stories originated. At the end of this time, the egg broke into two parts, and a man, this Prajapati, was produced from it. In the latter Upanishads, one half of the golden egg is said to have become the sky, the other half the earth, and the Satpata Brahma, Prajapati, having emerged from the golden egg, from his breath, creates the Devas as gods. Well, New Agers like to call them gods too, who, entering the sky, produce light, and the Asuras, from his downward breathing, are flatulence, who, entering the earth as evil spirits, become demons and produce darkness. It is said that the light beings were around Adam, and that Satan went through Adam, coming out as like a fart or something. Here is evidence to which to base an interesting speculation. It can be no more than that, as to whether religious differences may have been at least one of the causes which divided the Indo-Europeans who went to Persia from those who went to India. For in the Persian religion, the Devas are the demons, while the godlike Ahuras, there emerged the mighty Ahura Mazda, the universal god of Zoroastrianism. One cannot but think here that also of the regions of upper light, and neither darkness, upper light, goodness, and nether darkness, evil, of Zoroastrianism, and the heaven and hell so clearly conceived in Christianity some 800 years after the writing of the Brahmanas. Now, the Persians and the Arabs, some of their language was kind of designed to insult each other, and you do find that in some cultures, particularly when they're right next to each other, but really the experts are the Persian languages and the Hindu languages insult, but it wasn't per se that they really thought that the one was worshiping the demons and the other was worshiping and we're the ones on the side of the good. And, well, that's oversimplifying, but anyways. The joyousness which so often pervaded the Vedas now disappears, and a pessimistic conviction that life is a burden and rebirth a misfortune. This became a most important basis for the creed of Gautama Buddha approximately 300 years later, Something else of great significance was happening to Indian religious belief. At the time of the Brahmanas, even then the religious observances were becoming cluttered with complicated ceremonials conducted by the priest. The gods were being constantly propitiated by material sacrifices. But the fertile minds of Indian thinkers were beginning to question the materialistic complexity of these practices and the multiplicity of the gods to whom homage was given. An intangible spirituality was invading Hindu thought with the Upanishads, 800 to 600 BCE, actually closer to 1000, and the last of the Upanishads were actually written in the 500s of the Common Era. Some say there's counterfeit ones even going to about 1,000 years ago, which I wouldn't necessarily say they're counterfeit, they're just not of the same degree as the ones before 500 CE. Hinduism entered a new phase concerning the conception of Brahma as the supreme god. The names of the other gods are simply names of the various powers of the absolute, impersonal, indescribable being which created and rules the universe. See How Many Gods, page 50. The Nefri, I think there was this cult in California that I kept up with that they saw all the Egyptian gods as one, but different mask. And there's some truth to that concept, because the Tawhid doctrine. In the earlier writings, the word Brahma or Brahman had meant sacred knowledge or sacred utterances, or sacred utterance. Now closely connected and some synonymous with Brahma is the concept of Atman, the universal soul or self, which is within us all and which indeed is our being. See the universal self and the education of Thvateku, page 54, the recognition of the devotion to this self, and through the following of certain rules and social ethics, one may achieve union with Brahma, thus partaking of divinity, allegedly, and thus perhaps avoiding the repeated misery of rebirths. Now, see also the final snow. I made a video talking about the concept of Atman from, well, I mean, I represented that in that video.